Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in our series of live career webinars brought to you by the HOP platform. So HOP stands for the Hertfordshire Opportunities Portal. It is a website that we would like every young person in Hertfordshire to be aware of because it is a go-to for all the careers information and guidance that you will need, including our jobs vacancies in Hertfordshire, the sectors and industries that we need people to come into. So please do have a look at it if you're not already aware of it. The purpose of these webinars is to give you an insight into a particular career. So maybe there's a career you're thinking about, you'd like to know more about. This gives you the opportunity to hear directly from professionals within that industry who are doing roles that perhaps you'd like to do in a few years' time. And you've got the opportunity to quiz them and to ask them questions and to find out a little bit more about what they do. So today's webinar is all about careers in politics and public service, and we've got a great panel for you who I will introduce you to very shortly. I'm expecting a couple more panelists, so you can see Owen and you can see Tina on your screen at the moment. We are expecting a couple more panelists to come and join us throughout the webinar, but the way this works is that those of you watching, we can't see or hear any of you, but hopefully you can see, hear and hear us. There is Alex who's just joined us as well. Hello, Alex. I'll get him to introduce himself very, very shortly as well. But you can interact with our panelists. So if there's anything you hear from them that you'd like to know a little bit more about, then you click on the questions tab on your dashboard. It opens a text box. The text box, you can type your question in. It's only visible to me, and then I will forward that question to whichever of the panelists you would like that question to go to. So this webinar is being recorded as well. If you can't stay with us till the end of it, we'll probably go until about 5:30. It will be available to watch back tomorrow. If you're watching it and you think I've got a friend, I've got a family member who would really like to watch this as well, then do let them know. They will be able to watch it back on our YouTube channel, which you can see details of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you over to our panelists to introduce themselves first of all, and then we'll come back. There's a number of questions I'm going to ask first of all, and then we'll come in to your questions. So first of all, because you're in the top right of my screen, I'm going to introduce you to Owen Davis. And Owen, if I could also ask you to introduce your colleague, Daisy, who'll be joining us later as well. So Owen, thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm a caseworker and administrative officer for Daisy Cooper, the MP for St Albans. So I help support Daisy's office with casework issues. This could span from immigration, housing benefits, education, or health issues. So when constituents contact Daisy, I'm there to sort of support them and her deal with any casework needs that her constituents have. And yes, and she'll be joining the call hopefully at 5 o'clock. But yeah, if you have any questions on the work I do, happy to answer them.
For sure. So we were really keen to, well, obviously we're really keen to get Daisy on as a constituent MP to tell us about the, I guess, the celebrity life of working in politics, but really keen to get Owen in as well. So it says Owen is a caseworker for Daisy, and for every constituency MP, of which there's what 650 of them around the country, there are, how many in your team, Owen? You're one of, did you say 4 or 5?
There's about 5 of us at the moment. So there's a couple more caseworkers and a parliamentary assistant and also a comms officer that work with Daisy.
For sure. So there's a big support team around those constituency MPs. So we're going to find out more about Owen's role as well. Good afternoon to Alex. Alex, thank you for joining us. If you could tell us about your role within Hertfordshire County Council.
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, Alex James. I'm the head of corporate policy at Hertfordshire County Council. I sit within the kind of the centre of the county council, which is responsible for delivering many other different public services that everyone in Hertfordshire will receive. My particular role is very much about looking at corporate strategies and kind of government policies, and helping kind of the council think through kind of what key strategies and key approaches and policies that it may want to implement in terms of Hertfordshire. Also looking at monitoring what's happening in terms of government policy and helping kind of brief others about kind of what the implications of that work may be, and indeed advising both our politicians, but also our senior officers about how we may wish to respond as a council. And alongside that, there's a lot of kind of research, and there's a lot of kind of working with a whole lot of kind of internal and external partners. But essentially corporate strategy, corporate planning, and also how we kind of consult with our residents to try and shape those kind of approaches as well.
For sure, thank you, Alex. And good afternoon, Tina. Tell us a little bit about your role.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tina Bartois. I'm a Labour County Councillor in Letchworth Garden City. I've been a councillor for 2 years now, since I was 19 at that time, and still I'm the youngest ever county councillor for Hertfordshire. I'm 21 now and a student at Queen Mary in London and just about to graduate. Just a bit about my councillor role. So I have previously been involved with environment and planning. Those are issues that obviously a lot of people are very interested in, but I now sit on scrutiny, so I have oversight over the council's decisions across the board, and we've seen recently in politics how important it is that that accountability happens, and that we have that collaboration as well.
For sure. Okay, thank you, Tina. Look, we look forward to delving more into all of your careers and your backgrounds as well as we go on. One thing I do want to say is that this webinar is completely apolitical. So although we've got someone representing the Labour Party and Tina, we've got Daisy and Owen within Daisy's support team representing Liberal Democrats here. They're very much here to talk about their careers and their roots into the roles that they're in. So it's not about politics, it's not about their opinions on certain matters. So just be mindful of that when you ask any questions. Really, today it's to talk about the careers around politics and public service. So what I'd like to come on to is just to have a think about what you do on a day-to-day basis, basically. Now, obviously, Daisy's role is going to be slightly different from the rest of you, but I mean, let me start with you, Owen. What does the average day look like for you?
Sure. So there's a number of different things that sort of in my work streams for Daisy. So for example, if I just do an example from this week, we had a constituent contact us about a sort of an urgent issue about a passport and needing to get home quickly from a country abroad. So in that case, it was quite an urgent issue where there was sort of some other needs involved, family needs that she needs to get home. So I contacted her Foreign Office in this case to make sure that she had all her documents in place quite quickly. And that was be able to expedite from Daisy's office, so she was able to get home in time. So that's one example this week that I did. And also other bits, I helped Daisy organise her diary a bit. So any constituency events, I will put that in her diary and liaise with her on who's coming to that event, sort of brief her on what she may be talking about in that event. And yeah, so it's very varied, my work. Also, deal with other cases. So on an ongoing weekly basis, I'll probably have 20 or so cases that I'm going back and forward with other agencies like the DWP or HMRC. So I guess that's just a flavour of my week. It's very varied, different casework, and sort of also checking in with Daisy and see if she needs me to follow up with anything that she's been working on, really.
Sure. And Owen, do you get out and about, or are you very much office based?
I definitely do. I go to events with Daisy, and sometimes I'll pop into Parliament if she has an event that she needs a staff member with. So for example, tomorrow I think we're going to a care home because it's care home week, so I just help organise that for her, and so I'll do some follow-up work if there's anything that comes from that.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, how much research are you doing at any one point? I know it might depend on the particular cases that you're working on or looking at.
Sure. I think it's just dependent on the case, but if there's something particularly tricky, there's sort of resources available to us like the House of Commons Library, where we can get information if it's like on an immigration matter or a healthcare matter or even a benefits matter. There's quite a lot of resources available to us to sort of untie maybe sort of harder cases and things like that. So yeah, there is a bit of research, but there's also bits that you can do quite quickly as well, get sorted out.
For sure. I mean, the picture we've got on screen at the moment, or the top picture anyways, of Daisy in the House of Commons, perhaps asking a question or giving a speech or giving a thought about something. I mean, how much do you and your team contribute to everything she might say or ask in Parliament?
Again, it depends. Sometimes the parliamentary assistant, Will, who's not on this call, he will help Daisy with a bit of research to help sort of any sort of points that she wants to put across. But mainly Daisy does deal with that, you know, any speeches she'll write herself and things like that. But if there's anything she wants inputted, like if there's a certain case that she would want to raise in the House, she'll ask us and then she'll raise that with a minister or things like that. So yeah, we definitely do support on sort of any evidence she wants from the constituency to raise in the House of Commons.
Sure. Okay. Tina, let's move on to you. I believe that is you in that bottom picture there. At least if when I googled your name, that was one of the images that came up. So we were talking off air about how you do your county council role on top of the job that you've got as well. So just talk us through an average week for you and how much time you're able to dedicate to your role as a councillor.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to start with a couple of different things that go into being a councillor. So there's the first, the thing that I'm going to start with is the formal council meetings. Those I think are what people typically think of when they think of councillors and what they do. So obviously these are really important. They give you the opportunity to be involved in strategic decision making. So for example, you're balancing different needs, such as balancing LED streetlights with public safety, or making decisions on things like should the council pay for free school meals in the holidays. Then there's the casework aspect. Now this is very much why I got involved. This involves helping people with their problems or areas of interest. So things like making sure that potholes get repaired, supporting parents with school places for their children, looking into things like I recently got a school crossing installed, and these come to us in a variety of ways. So you might get an email, a phone call. I go door knocking quite often. That's an important way that my residents feed back to me. We also have surgeries, but generally speaking, I'll be walking down the street and things come up as and when, and that's fine. And just lastly, and I think this is the bit that I enjoy the most, there's a lot of community events that I attend. So councillors are community leaders, and that's really important in the local area. You might be invited to visit organisations, and there are particular occasions that you might be marking. For example, recently I was involved with the Armed Forces Day in Letchworth, where I was out representing the community. I'd say, like, on a day-to-day basis and an average week, like, a lot of my weekends are taken up by some more of the campaigning aspects of the role. My evenings are usually when these community events are happening. Hertfordshire County Council has council meetings in the daytime, so that's a couple of times a month. And so far, for most of the 2 years, I've been balancing that with being a full-time student. So at times that's been more difficult than others. My university was very much on board with the stuff that I do in the community at home, but I think that it's been particularly challenging with my dissertation, and I've spent the last 6 months also working for a charity. I guess, like what we were saying offline before this started, was that being a councillor is very much a voluntary role that you get an allowance for, and you get to make a massive contribution to your local area. But it's not a full-time job in the way in which you might think of politics typically. But Daisy will be able to tell you more about what politics looks like when it is your full-time job, but I'm balancing it with a lot of other bits and pieces.
For sure, but I mean, obviously, it's clearly giving you great exposure to the whole sort of political system and workings, as well as giving you good opportunities to interact with the community as well. And I know you've got a lot of causes that are very close to your heart that I dare say were probably the drivers for you getting involved in this work.
So I think initially the things that really interested me about the role was I'd been campaigning against cuts to education funding. I was doing that when Theresa May was Prime Minister, which feels like it was a very long time ago, but it actually wasn't. I was coordinating the youth and student wings of climate groups. I was involved with charities, and a lot of the stuff I was doing before I was involved with the Labour Party. But the area that I represent is very deprived, and it's something that I could see the massive need in the community. And from my own upbringing and having been brought up here and living here as well, so I could see that a lot of the issues that I was interested in were things that the county council has influence over. But the other thing as well is I'm really interested in making sure that we have a diverse set of voices at the table. And I think that it's quite difficult to get people involved, say people of colour, for example, without actually then being willing to put yourself forward and give it a go. So that was the thing. I was like, I'm going to give it a go. And I have done a lot of work to really hear the voices of underrepresented groups, including young people. And I think that that kind of representation is really valid and important as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you. Pretty good answer. Alex, tell us a little bit more about your roles. I think more particularly the ones prior to working in Hertfordshire County Council, because I know you've had sort of a variety of different roles within central government functions and local government as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose the first thing to stress is that clearly I'm not a politician like Tina or Daisy. I'm currently a full-time employee of the county council, but as you say, actually, and therefore kind of what you would probably call as I think civil servants are more traditionally kind of national government and then kind of local government officer in terms of local councils. But you say in terms of my career, I've covered both during that time. So actually, I started off as a graduate trainee in the National Civil Service. As is often the way when you've been working there for a while, a lot of the government departments have changed their names quite a few times. So actually, I worked in what was known as the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister many years ago when we had a Labour government, but is now known as the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. But essentially, kind of, I was on a graduate trainee scheme, and which gave me an opportunity to work on a whole range of different national government policies, whether that's in terms of policy for town planning, for housing, and also look at local government matters. And over a period of time, as I was there for 4 years, it then gave me a really good opportunity to then move into working for local councils. So I actually work for Hertfordshire County Council now, and I've done a whole variety of roles over there over the last sort of 10 to 12 years. But I've also kind of performed kind of roles for working for a number of different councils in a regional role, and also for other councils as well. I used to work for Bedfordshire County Council as well. And I think kind of, as I say, I'm not a politician. We as kind of paid employees of councils or national governments, clearly we serve and we kind of work for whatever is the government or the administration or the controlling party of the day. But clearly, whilst we are paid employees, we are operating within a political environment, even though, as you say, we have to kind of make sure that we are a neutral force within that.
Absolutely, sure. Well, I think we've been joined by Daisy. I did see her pop up a moment ago. So, Daisy, we're delighted to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We've just gone through the introductions. I suppose what would be really interesting is, well, firstly, tell us what your role is now for anyone who doesn't know, but also I'm really keen to know what your journey was before being elected to Parliament in 2019.
Sure. How long do we need to talk for? You want the 2-minute version or the 10-minute version?
You can give us as much or as little as you like, Daisy. It will be
Sure.
very informative either way.
Okay, I'll try and keep it fairly brief. I'm sure there'll be questions and things. So I tried to say that my job includes 3 things. And the first thing is the bit that people don't see at all. So the very first thing that I do is I help people. And I help people all the time with all sorts of queries. So it can be a housing issue where maybe somebody's in a housing association and their roof has collapsed or their ceilings collapsed and the housing association isn't responding to something. It could be someone's trying to renew their driving license and it hasn't responded for months on end. It could be an immigration query because maybe somebody's got a son or a daughter who's in another country and they're suddenly very ill and they need an emergency visa. And there's just a huge amount of that stuff, and because it's obviously confidential, people don't realise that MPs do a vast amount of that. And certainly in my office, I'd say the vast bulk of the resource goes into dealing with those casework inquiries. And Owen's fantastic at helping with all of it. And Owen will know that, you know, occasionally when you're hitting your head against a brick wall because the government department doesn't realise how urgent something is, that's when Owen will message me and say, look, we've got this urgent case, we've hit a brick wall, what can you do? And that's when I go and find a minister and say, look, I need you to get on top of this and get me an answer in the next 24 hours. So that's the first chunk of work that I do. The second chunk is the stuff that people see more of. This is where MPs go to Parliament and we debate issues and we vote on new laws. I think the bit that most people are familiar with is Prime Minister's Questions. It's a very rowdy 30-minute piece of theatre that we get every single week, and it doesn't reflect what politics is like most of the time. In and around the main chamber, there are all sorts of debates that happen. A large amount of the time, MPs on a cross-party basis can actually agree on many of the problems, less so maybe on the solutions, but we do often work together on a cross-party basis. Even when we're getting cross with each other in the chamber, we can shake hands and be friendly about it when we leave. So it's best to think of the chamber as being a bit like a football match. And then the third part of the job, which is really fun, which is the sort of borderline civic bit that MPs do. So you might go and open a school, or you might go and talk to some children, or you might go and visit a local park, and you find out about the extraordinary work that local volunteers and organisations are doing. And as a result of meeting them, you get a better sense of what's important to people, what the challenges are in different sectors, and then you can raise their concerns in Parliament, either through letters or through questions. So there's really those sort of 3 different bits to an MP's job. In terms of how I got into it, I don't come from a political family. I wasn't involved in student politics. It hadn't crossed my mind until I was in my late 20s. And I was sitting on the sofa on a Sunday morning watching a political TV show. I didn't like what was being said. At the time, there was a Labour government, and they were talking about 42 days detention without charge, which to me felt incredibly illiberal. And there was a sort of very kind of stigmatised racial element to some of those proposals as well, which I really went to my core, really kind of offended my sort of core beliefs around the equality of every individual and allowing every individual to live their lives as they choose. And so I decided that day to get involved. I thought I was a Lib Dem. I'd always voted Lib Dem. I thought I'd better check I'm a Lib Dem. So I went onto Google and researched the 3 big political parties and realised that, yes, I was definitely a Liberal Democrat. Joined up, and to cut a long story short, after doing some campaigning and cutting my teeth, I ended up in St Albans and got elected in 2019. So hopefully that's a quick run through.
Sure. No, well, in fact, you've perhaps answered my next question, which was going to be particularly for Tina and to Daisy, but I want to get Owen and Alex's views on this as well. Does a political party find you, or do you find it? Particularly, you know, when you're actually going to be representing them. So Daisy, in your case, I guess you kind of answered that, but you're always pretty clear.
It really varies. So to be honest, I think a lot of people, I'll be slightly gendered about this. a lot of men who want to get involved in politics find the party, because men, there's something about our society, the way that we bring up men and women differently. Men are better at putting themselves forward, whereas, and this is a bit stereotyped, and I don't mean it to be, but there is just a trend that women often have to be asked. And there is a big campaign group called Ask Her to Stand. And so it's slightly gendered, but it's, there obviously are a number of exceptions, but sometimes a party will find individuals. So I meet individuals through my work all the time, and I will ask them to get involved and stand for election either as a councillor or as an MP. But then there are others like myself who decide one day that they want to get involved. And we see it in peaks and troughs. So when there are big political events, when there's a general election, people tend to voluntarily get involved because they're excited by seeing the general election. When there's a big event like Brexit, whatever your politics are, it infused a lot of people to get involved in politics. So when you see these big political events, that's when people tend to volunteer and sort of self-identify themselves as political activists who want to get stuck in. But the rest of the time, when we're just going through the kind of the daily churn, often it's down to those of us in sort of leadership positions to find people and encourage them to get involved in a way that suits them.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, look, Tina, let me ask you the same question. Did you find the Labour Party, or did the Labour Party find you?
I think generally speaking in politics, I would agree with Daisy that both happen. But I think what was slightly different for me was I don't really think it was a major political kind of event that politicized me. But the first political decision that I remember impacting my life was the bedroom tax, and that's kind of the thing that I always credit for my political involvement. But at that point I was very, very young, and it was something that really badly impacted my family and made me just feel completely helpless. And I would kind of see politicians on the TV, these things like Prime Minister's Questions, and think, well, none of them really look like me, and I don't really feel any type of way about that. But what I did have an affinity with was some of the things that the last Labour government did that, despite me having had a really difficult upbringing and background, there were things that really made a difference in my education, in things like the national minimum wage, and those are the things where, like, I knew that my political leanings were that way. But again, I got involved because I'd been campaigning on different issues, and I really felt like politics was the way to get some of those issues resolved, and that was where we needed to put energy into to get the awareness raised of those things. But I never really thought I'd end up at a meeting, and now I'm on a council, so that in itself is quite interesting. But you learn a lot about the processes and the things that you have to do and go through to make decisions really happen. So sometimes it can feel like, something's taking a really, really long time, but there are reasons for that, and often a lot of hoops to jump through. So yeah, did the Labour Party choose me? Did I choose it? A bit of both, who knows?
For sure. Okay. Well, Owen, thinking about you and your colleagues, and actually maybe this would be a better question to Daisy to answer on your behalf, but how important is it in your role supporting a Liberal Democrat MP that you are a Liberal Democrat yourself, or that you share those views? Could you do the job that you did if you had perhaps other political views or thoughts, or perhaps if you weren't political at all?
I think it's really important that you align with your MP's values. I don't think you necessarily have to be a Liberal Democrat. Like, I'm not a member of the Liberal Democrats personally, but I do think it's important that you align with the values that your MP is trying to promote in Parliament, in the community. So I don't think it's necessarily a must, but I think it is important because you're essentially working with constituents all the time, promoting what Daisy's putting forward as her agenda with the Liberal Democrats. So it would be important to me, and I think that's why I've worked for Daisy for three years now. So I think I think it is important that your values do align, personally. But yeah, I also think with this jobs you could learn quite a lot in terms of different skill sets as well. So it's actually contacting other agencies, it's working with constituents all across the political spectrum. So it doesn't really matter who contacts Daisy or us, we'll always support them. So yeah.
Sure. I thought you answered that question incredibly well. Then I really did throw you on the spot there, particularly with your boss on the call at the same time. I mean, Alex, from your perspective, you said really as a civil servant, working local government now, can you have strong party political views, or do you have to keep them very neutral?
Well, I suppose I'm sure many of my colleagues will have strong political views, but I think the important thing is about not bringing them to work. So I think it's very. I work obviously with a whole range of different people at the council, and I must, to be honest, not be able to tell you a lot of kind of where their political values align. I know that people I work with have very kind of strong values about public service, about providing kind of public services and supporting those communities that or families or individuals that need support. But actually, in terms of their political views, that's very much something that isn't and shouldn't be an important part of kind of being a civil servant or a local government officer. As I say, I have my own political views, and I would challenge most people I work with to try and work out what they are possibly. But I think the important thing here is that I mean, I've certainly kind of worked at councils and indeed national government for different political, whilst different political parties have been in control, as it were, and indeed at a local council we have kind of councillors from a range of different political parties, whether that's Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, indeed Green Party, and indeed Independents, and we have a responsibility to provide advice and information as requested to all of those. So we serve councillors from each of the political parties, and indeed, even if you did try to perhaps kind of choose to be in a particular council of a particular kind of hue, certainly we've had local elections both locally and across the country very recently, and seen a lot of different change of control in terms of both Hertfordshire and beyond. So even if you thought you were perhaps kind of working for a particular type of council, it doesn't take very long potentially for it to potentially change as well. I think the final thing I would just say is, as local government officers, not my particular post, but certainly the more senior you go in the organisation, actually by law, you're not allowed to be part of a political party. So, for instance, our chief executive and our executive directors, they are bound by law not to be a political part of a political party for that very nature, as I say, about making sure that we are, as officers, able to provide that political neutrality and be able to work with whatever political party ends up being in administration or in control of the council we operate in.
Sure. Okay, thank you. If you're watching this live at the moment, do get your questions in. So the way that you do that is on the questions tab. Click that, there's a text box, type your question in. If you put the name of the person you want that question to go to, I can specifically direct it to them. I'll say, just for the interest of this webinar, we are talking more about the career side of it. So I'm sure we'd love to quiz Daisy on hundreds of things that are going on in Parliament at the moment, but we're more interested in the careers side of it, things, or any insights that you would like. The next section is going to be around different routes into politics. So Daisy, let me start with you. Of you and your 649 other colleagues who sit in Westminster, do you all have politics A levels and politics degrees? Is that a prerequisite?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. The one thing I say when I go into schools and people say to me, how do I get into politics? I say, follow your heart, and follow your heart and go into a career that you're going to enjoy, because politics runs through every single thing. So if you want to be an engineer and you want to design climate friendly material bridges or something, there's a huge amount of politics around that, in terms of the decisions that government make around how they regulate your industry, around the money that they spend, around the politics of how they make those decisions. And if you want to be a music teacher or you want to be a musician, there's a huge amount of politics around the rights that you have to the content that you produce. And if you write a song, what are your rights as compared to ChatGPT, for example? So whatever your interest is, follow your heart and go into that industry, because if you're interested in politics as well, there will be politics in that industry, whatever it is that you do. What's really interesting is people often say, what experience and qualifications do you need to be an MP? And my response to that is there's a distinction between the technical answer around what qualifications do you need to be an MP and what skills do you need to be a good MP. Because the technical answer to the first question is that you don't need any at all. And one of the great joys of democracy is that we don't put any prerequisites on it at all. You don't even have to be able to read and write. You don't have to be able to add up. You don't need to have any qualifications or any formal education at all to stand for a member of parliament. You just need to persuade the majority of people in a particular constituency to vote for you. So that's the only qualification, is that people think that you are the best person to speak for them. That's basically it. That's the technical answer. But of course, once you are elected, there are particular skills that you might need to be an effective and a good MP. So being able to clearly communicate what your constituents believe in or what their challenges are is really, really important. Being a sort of solutions focused MP, I think, is important. The government is weighed down, particularly at the moment, with enormous problems. There's lots of people competing for attention. If I go and speak to a minister and take a problem with me and say, look, this is a major issue, they're far more likely to talk to me if I can present some solutions alongside that and say, look, I'll work with you to change this because it's in the interest of my constituents. So I think being a clear communicator, being genuinely motivated to get the best results for people, I personally think is an important thing. But what I would say is that there is no manual for how to be a good MP. And it depends wildly on whether you have an enormous majority, whether you have a safe seat or not, whether you actually enjoy the constituency side of it, whether you prefer the parliamentary side of it. There's all sorts of different ways of doing the job. And ultimately, it comes down to the constituents to decide whether or not you're doing a good job or not. And if not, they vote you out the next time round.
Sure. Okay. So look, so if you want to be a constituency MP, you want to be sitting in Westminster there. No, you don't. Daisy's been quite emphatic there. It's very much about, your personality and those I guess softer skills that you might have. But any of you put your hand up if you've actually done a degree or an A level in politics? So Alex has. Oh, I know Owen has. Oh, in fact, all three hands have gone up.
I'm the only one that hasn't, I think.
You're the only one that hasn't. There you go. Well, Owen, let me go to you. Do you think doing the role that you do compared to the role that Daisy does, do you think it's more important that you've perhaps studied politics as a A level or above?
No, I don't think so at all, really. I think you learn a lot whilst you're doing the job about how government works and how laws are made and things like that. But my sort of career before Daisy's, she said I sort of was quite passionate about migrant and refugee rights. So I worked as a caseworker for about 2 or 3 years with victims of trafficking. So that was to do with benefits, housing, obviously immigration. So I got quite a lot of experience around sort of liaising with the Home Office and working with that sort of community. So then when I sort of transferred those skills over working with Daisy's office, and it's sort of you don't really need to know about the technicalities of Westminster, even though there's some sort of archaic rules that Daisy will know about that are a bit strange. But you didn't know. I don't think you need to study politics, although I did. But it is useful in a sense, but you do learn a lot on the job. And if you have supportive colleagues as well and a supportive team, everybody sort of helps you know sort of how to navigate things as well. So yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, Alex, let me ask you the same question. So from a civil servant's perspective, knowing how government works, or at least is supposed to work, is that a good asset for someone who wants to go into that sort of career?
It certainly helps, but I would also echo as well that actually in terms of the entry points into both kind of local councils, public sector, kind of central government, that certainly kind of a degree in politics is far from essential. And in fact, actually, if I reflect on kind of the studies I did for my politics degree, it was very much none of it was on practical kind of issues about kind of how government work. Now, I think it's more about kind of the transferable skills that it can provide to you. I think what I would say in terms of kind of all of public service is that I'm talking about my kind of career as a generalist, which is about kind of having a whole set of transferable skills, which things like a social sciences degree, history or politics, kind of gives you a good way of kind of taking those skills and then kind of give you an ability to then transfer them to other careers. But it could certainly be any type of a degree, I think, kind of with transferable skills which you could use, and certainly looking at a lot of the kind of the graduate entry points into central government, things like the fast stream civil service, which is their kind of their main generalist kind of entry point into the civil service. Their requirement is a degree of a certain level. Actually, what it is almost isn't the point. It's more about kind of showing that you're at a certain level where you can operate with transferable skills. I should also stress, though, that even though I'm talking of myself as a generalist, actually, when you look at both the civil service and certainly councils, actually, they employ a whole range of different people of different kind of careers. So whilst I'm talking about myself as a generalist, our council employs town planners, accountants, lawyers, social workers, engineers. So clearly, if you are looking for a job in those professions, whether it's in the public sector or private sector, there are different routes. But it's more, I would say, is having a good degree which demonstrates your ability to develop kind of good communication, good analysis, good research skills is actually the more important part, as opposed to what particular degree you do.
For sure. Okay, and then Tina, let me bring you in, because you've only fairly recently left school. I think it was Hitchin Girls, wasn't it? You were at, just
Yes,
to name check there. So look, what would you say to someone if they were, I don't know, any age, I guess 13, 14 up, if they think they want to go into politics, what are the sorts of experiences that they should be trying to gain whilst they're still at school?
Yeah, so just first of all, obviously I'm an elected politician with both an A-level in government and politics and a recent degree in politics and international relations. But what I'll say about it is that that way of looking at politics is very academic. It's not a vocation, so you don't go and do the degree and turn out and suddenly you're Daisy. That's not what's happening. Yeah, I think that my lived experiences, volunteering in this community, growing up in poverty, creating campaigns, and just my compassion for other people's situations, those things are far more important than that A level or my degree. But in terms of kind of what experiences you can gain while still at school, that's quite interesting, because there's a number of different things you can do. I recently had the pleasure of touring around a student from a local college. So we went round the council building, talked about some of the history, and sat in on some of the decision making, and I spoke to them about my experience of politics. So there's a number of different things that I did. I started going along to council meetings, particularly with the climate change hat on. There were a couple of meetings that were related to climate that were local to me. It was when councils were declaring a climate emergency. I spent quite a lot of time probably really annoying my MP through writing and emails, and I obviously made the decision to join a political party, and I did that when I was 17, because I'd had a really bad experience reaching out to some local councillors on a housing issue, and I just was in the situation where for some reason I was running late because the bus was late home, and this just meant that I bumped into the Labour candidate for the local area, slightly quizzed him in the process, but I thought, that his experiences were really good and that he was bringing a really kind of fresh perspective. So I went and campaigned for him, and like I said, I just kept campaigning. I didn't really have the intention to go to a meeting, and then was kind of roped into that as well. And before you know it, here we are. But I think there's a number of different things that you can do. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, and some that I actually have a lot of interest in, things like social media, and behind the scenes there are some paid opportunities as well to be involved in a campaign, and that's just really, really exciting. Yeah, and I think if you're interested in a single issue, for example, climate change, or a couple of different issues, whether they kind of relate to each other or not. So I've got a couple of kind of big issues because of my lived experiences, and there's different ways of getting involved in campaigns around that don't necessarily mean joining a political party. And in fact, on many issues, I have worked cross-party and am working cross-party. And when I was doing, in particular, my climate activism, I worked with a number of people who were quite the opposite of enthusiastic about any of the major parties as well. So yeah, it's all good experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, please do. Yeah,
because Tina just reminded me of something. I think the big distinction is that if you want to work in politics, then having some experience or knowledge of politics and having a degree can really help you to get into that career. But if you want to be an elected representative, and that's the distinction, then actually it's more about who you are and your life experience and the way that you approach people. And my best piece of advice for anybody at school would be to identify an issue where you think something is unfair or some kind of injustice or something that you want to change, and then campaign to try and change it. And that's the best piece of advice I can give. So try and change something that you care about, and then you realise whether actually politics is for you or not.
Daisy, it's funny you should say that. It's almost as if you read the question that's already been sent through to me. And I have got a number of questions here. If you do want to ask any questions, it's probably your last chance to do it. I will try and get through all the ones that have come in so far. So the question is, Daisy, when you were at school, were there any causes you were particularly passionate about? So I know, did you remember campaigning about lunch break being reduced by 5 minutes, or were there other matters?
Yeah, there's, I mean, loads all the time. So the one I remember most was when I was when I was very little, right? So early 80s, we thought that the climate catastrophe was enormous, right? We had acid rain, we had, you know, lakes and rivers around the world where all the fish were dying, and it felt like a kind of real moment of climate catastrophe. That meant that I became very sort of climate conscious, you know, as a sort of 4 or 5 year old. And as part of that, you know, I would campaign and go on marches with my mum against acid rain, and I had all the t-shirts where saying, you know, sort of save the elephants and save the rivers and all this kind of stuff. I used to collect lots of conkers and plant trees and then try and flog them to holidaymakers in Suffolk, you know. So I was really big into planting trees as a young person. I planted loads and loads and loads of them. Then when I was at high school, there was a change in the school uniform. And they introduced a new jumper, which was very expensive and also very scratchy. So we campaigned to say that families who couldn't afford to buy the new jumper didn't have to buy it, and that they would delay that for a couple of years until there were sort of other jumpers coming back down through the kind of pass it on chain. And then again, I went to university, and at that time, some students had their own laptops. Some of us couldn't afford to buy our own laptops, and the university was going to close down what was called a computer lab, which was you know, basically a room full of computers for those of us who couldn't afford our own, and they were going to close it down. And so I heavily petitioned the Vice Chancellor by sending lots of emails, but also standing outside his office until he decided to change his mind. So those kind of things, I've always been a campaigner through and through. It's been in my blood, but they were not on big political issues of the day. They were things that I thought were unfair, that were affecting me. And actually that's how a lot of people get involved in politics. It's by when a policy affects them personally, that's their kind of motivation for getting involved.
For sure. Okay, right, there's some more questions that have come through. This one again is specifically at you, Daisy. So to Daisy and those interested, would you say that the size of your party affects your views and decisions politically?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, the fact is, I chose to join the party for a reason, right? Because it reflects my values. I'm an internationalist, I'm an environmentalist, I'm pro-business, I'm pro-public sector, I'm pro-diversity. These are the kind of the core values that I believe in and that guide everything that my party and I do. So I don't think the size of the party really matters, because we still have votes in Parliament. I think what matters more is the conviction that we have. The fact is, to be a member of Parliament in any smaller party, you've actually got to be more dogged and more determined, because the first past the post system is weighted against you. So to get elected in the first place, you've got to be a pretty dogged campaigner, and you've got to, kind of be prepared to put more of yourself into the role. So I don't think it changes our political decisions. I think if anything, it means that we've probably got more drive.
Okay, I mean, Tina, let me ask you a similar question. Do you have, as a Hertfordshire County Councillor representing the Labour Party, do you have to agree with everything that Central Labour Party says and states and puts in there, and puts out publicly, or do you have the ability to have a slightly different view?
Okay, so I'm just going to start by saying that I do think that values are the most important thing, because they are the consistent thing where, the leadership of the party, your stances on different issues, the situations that might come up continually change. But essentially at the heart of the Labour Party is that sharing of wealth and power. Now, it's interesting what you say about being kind of in that third party, Daisy, because that's where the Labour Party is in the context of Hertfordshire County Council. So that kind of cross-party working, that really dogged campaigning, it's very, very important. Do I have to agree with everything that the National Party says? I would go with no, because one of the I think best things about being a member of a party is that you get to kind of change and inform those positions. And the Labour Party is really member-led. I've been involved with policy on a number of different fronts, and consulting on members is something that we do very, very often. So yeah, I think you don't have to agree with everything. But the other thing I'd say is you're never going to agree with 100% of everything, because we're all kind of informed by our surroundings and our environment and our situation and who we are and how we see ourselves. And that's what I think politics is about. It's about people and how people see themselves.
Sure. Okay. Dave, I guess it's a slightly related question. How much choice do you have on the, theme that you specialise in? Because I know you're the spokesperson within your party for health and social care. Is that because they needed someone to do it and you put your hand up, or is it because it's something you had a real interest in and you went to your leader and said, look, this is something I really want to campaign and be a spokesperson for?
It's entirely a decision of the party leader. But obviously there are conversations that happen behind the scenes. So when I was first elected, obviously I was untested, I was new, so I was given two what are considered smaller briefs. So the Justice brief and the DCMS brief, that stands for Digital Culture, Media and Sports. I absolutely relished those. I have a law degree by background, so I was very interested in the justice element, and I decided within the portfolio of justice I wanted to focus on women's justice. So I did a fair bit of work on that, and I am a amateur musician, so I love the DCMS brief as well. I'm also fascinated with the regulation of data and media and things, so I love both of those briefs. But then I was asked to take on education, which was quite a surprise to me, because I don't have any particular sort of policy knowledge or experience in the education field other than what I get from my constituents, but I did that and enjoyed that for a year. But at that point, my colleague who was doing the health brief, she had covered it throughout the pandemic and quite frankly was, needed a bit of a breather, let's put it that way. And so I was really keen to take on the health brief because I love health and social care policy. I really do. It's a real passion of mine. And she's very passionate about education. So it was a bit of a running joke in Parliament, because when people change their portfolios, there's normally some kind of politics that goes on behind it, and everyone wanted to know what the dirty politics was, and we basically just agreed we wanted to swap, and our party leader said okay then, so that was it.
Yeah, for that. So, I'm going to ask this question to Owen. So Owen, what would be a good way for a gap year student to get involved with politics or campaigning on issues? Are internships and pressure groups the best way forward? So any thoughts you've got on that?
I think so. There's a number of different things you can do. You could go down the route of joining a political party, like Tina did, and then campaign for like a local candidate or a local councillor. So that's a good way of going through the local party, whatever party you support, Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, whoever. I think also volunteering is quite good. Like I remember at university volunteering for the Refugee Council. I did that for like a year and a bit. But I think any sort of, it sounds a bit enough, but any experience you can do, like just working, you build loads of different skills. That could be like your first office job, or just working in the cafe, or just you learn so much from doing different things, I think, and it all helps build your career. So I wouldn't worry, like even if you get a job that's not directly in politics, or like in the area, I would just say just take all opportunities, because they're good to build your confidence as well. And especially I remember sort of coming out of school, it's you might not always think you can do things, but you definitely can if you just give it a go, I would say. So yeah, just try anything, any internship you can try. It might not be the one you really want, but it's good for your CV and to build confidence. I think that's the main thing. So that's what I'd say.
Sure. Okay. And then Alex, I'm going to ask you this question to start with. What are the main ways to enter or to get into a job in politics and public service? I mean, you alluded to the civil service roles, and I think you spoke about the degrees. And I know there's a fantastic apprenticeship program into the civil service as well. I dare say perhaps some of your colleagues may have done. But I mean, what advice would you give to someone if they want to go in? They're not going to go down the elected representative route. What would you recommend?
Well, yes, as you say, that actually there are quite a lot of different routes, and I think the first thing I would ask is, if you are thinking about working in the public sector, as I said before, there are a whole range of different careers you can go into. Do you want to be a social worker? Do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be more of a generalist? And each of those will have their own different routes in, but certainly there are increasingly a lot of different types of kind of apprenticeship that you can possibly take to get it into local councils in particular, and also other parts of the public sector. But inevitably there are also graduate schemes as well. So, and as I say, it doesn't really matter which degree you get. It's more about having a degree which kind of then opens you the door for potentially to sort of apply for those schemes. And there are, I suppose, kind of, I would mention there's three sort of ones I would mention in terms of that. One, I'd say, is the fast stream civil service one, which is for generalists, but they do also have kind of ones for a range of other careers, whether it's economists or finance and so on. Likewise, there is a national scheme for local government as well. It's called the National Local Government Graduate Scheme, I believe, and a similar sort of thing where you apply to join the scheme, and then you get allocated to a particular council, and then you'll do a whole range of different roles there. And as I work for the Hertfordshire County Council, I'd also be remiss to mention that we also have our own graduate schemes, whether that's in terms of finance, and particularly sort of generalists as well, each which would give you, I think, are a really good opportunity to see different parts of kind of the council or different organisations, see what different kind of roles may entail, which gives you a huge range of different really good opportunities and experience, but then gives you an opportunity to then work through actually what you might want to do off the back of that. Because I do appreciate that getting work experience is often really important and really helpful, but nonetheless often you'll join, especially if you're a generalist, an organisation you're not quite sure what you want to do. You probably have a general idea about kind of the sort of things you might want to do, but actually getting experience of different roles probably will give you a really good idea about where you might want to sort of go next.
Absolutely right. Penultimate question for you, Daisy, then I'm going to come to the last word to Tina, actually. Daisy, you've obviously, I know you love your job and you love the role that you do, but ultimately there's only ever 650 vacancies at a time in the UK to become a Westminster MP. So, but besides what you do, what other roles do you think you would really like to do within that politics and public service sphere? If you were going back and perhaps talking to a 16, 17-year-old, as you are at the moment, where would you recommend they go?
Great question. So before I was elected, which would be the clearest answer because I was doing that, I worked for a number of different organisations, and many of them involved working with MPs rather than working for an MP. So I worked for a campaign group called Hacked Off. It was established after the phone hacking scandal. I imagine people listening to this are probably too young to hear about this, but there was a time when some of the national newspapers employed people to hack the phones of ordinary folk so they could get salacious stories to increase their profit margins. And it was an illegal practice, and it was a big scandal. And 70% of the people that were targeted were just ordinary people who'd gone through sort of freak accidents and things, but there were a few celebrities involved as well. And I worked with that campaign group for 3 or 4 years, campaigning for a better form of independent regulation of the press to try and drive up some of the standards in our national media. I then worked for, at the time when there was the Conservatives had a very small majority under Theresa May, there seemed to be a real window of opportunity to get MPs to work together on a cross-party basis. So when a government has a really whopping majority, they can push through anything they like in Parliament. But when there's a small majority, there is an opportunity to try and influence government a lot more. So I actually ran a cross-party campaign group, and we set up a network of around, it was either 30 or 40 MPs from every political party who were working together on a cross-party basis to try and influence government. So there's lots of different sort of think tanks that do policy research. There's all sorts of charities that campaign for particular causes. So whatever the thing is that you're passionate about, whether it's, you know, breast cancer or children's rights or climate action or tackling homelessness, there's a huge number of local and national charities, and working for them, trying to influence people who are elected is a really fascinating place to work, and something that is a place where I started out.
Sure, thank you. So look, Tina, final word from you. I'm sort of quite keen to hear about your own personal ambition. So look, in a few years' time, having done the role, performing the role that you're doing at the moment, has it whet your appetite? Do you think you'll be arguing across the chamber with Daisy in a few years' time? What's the future for you?
I'm just going to start off with, I'd definitely love to, but for me, you know, politics isn't about holding a particular position, so like being a councillor or an MP. It's more about the causes that I'm really passionate about. So like Daisy used to, I now work with cross-party MPs on a number of different causes. I've recently been working for a higher education charity to put some of the issues that care experienced people and people with no family contact have, actually getting those issues put on the map, and that's something that is really close to my heart and my personal experience. And I'll mention I'm just about to go into a job that is related to politics and the Labour Party, but the role itself is to do with digital and campaigns. So I'm quite interested in building, in particular, my digital skills, because I've done a lot campaigning wise and kind of voluntarily, but it's really important. You know, skills like that are skills of the future. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to and what my aspirations are. But watch this space, things are happening.
Absolutely, we wish you the very best for that, Tina. So look, I mean, just in conclusion, I think both Tina and Daisy have done a wonderful job really of explaining the role of an elected representative within the political sphere. And I think what's really come across is just how passionate they are about so many causes. Certainly whenever I talk to elected representatives, I'm always amazed at just the sort of the breadth of knowledge about the amount of different things that you know about. Must have huge bandwidth, which I'm sure in part is down to people like Owen and to Alex and the roles that they play in making sure that they are well researched and that they can help inform, I guess, you guys as elected representatives and help steer that agenda. So in conclusion, I'd just like to thank our 4 panelists for joining us and for sharing their experiences with you all this afternoon. I found it really, really informative and really insightful, and I'm sure any of you watching this who are at school at the moment thinking about your next steps will be really enlightened by some of the things that you've heard. On your screen at the moment, I'm just reminding you about that HOP platform as well. Again, we hope that every young person in Hertfordshire and every school will be using this one. The QR code in the top left-hand corner will take you through to our virtual encounters page. So this video and all the other webinars that we've run over the last 3 years are on there. We did run one on specifically on working in local government and in the civil service a couple of years ago. So if anything that particularly that Alex has maybe said to you today has piqued your interest, then you might want to have a look at that one as well. let me thank all of you for watching live and for submitting your questions. Some really, really thoughtful questions which have undoubtedly contributed to the webinar as well. So to my panelists, so to Owen, Alex, Tina and Daisy, thank you so much for giving up your time for us this afternoon. We really, really appreciate all your insights. And thank you. And we wish all of you watching this at the moment the very best of luck in your future careers.